Ahead of us runs a boardwalk 1 mile long, a thin ribbon of steel and wood floating out over ground that cannot hold a person's weight. On either side, the land looks like a meadow, but it is not solid at all. This is the Big Bog, a 500 square mile expanse of peat, the largest bog in the lower 48 states. It has been called Minnesota's last true wilderness, and for most of its history, no one could walk into it and come back out. Today we can, because this single narrow path lets us cross a place that swallowed almost everyone who tried to tame it. We are in the far north of Minnesota, in Beltrami County, on the eastern shore of Upper Red Lake. The nearest community is Waskish, an unincorporated dot on Highway 72 about 15 miles north of Kellyher. Big Bog State Recreation Area spreads across more than 9,000 acres in 2 separate units, a southern unit down by the lake and a northern unit out here at the boardwalk. The lake sits at about 1,180 feet of elevation, and beyond it the peatland runs on for miles in every direction. It is one of the emptiest corners of the state, and one of the strangest. The flatness under our feet is not an accident. To understand it, you have to picture this whole region drowned. At the end of the last ice age, a colossal body of meltwater called Glacial Lake Agassiz covered much of this landscape, larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. When it finally drained away, it left behind a table-flat plain of clay and silt with almost no slope to carry water off. Big Bog sits on the southeast side of that vanished lake, and the water has been sitting here ever since. Lake Agassiz was one of the largest lakes the planet has ever held, born from the meltwater of a retreating ice sheet. For thousands of years, it flooded a basin stretching across what is now Minnesota, North Dakota, and central Canada. As the ice pulled back, the lake found new outlets and slowly emptied, but it left this region as flat as a floor and unable to drain. Rain that falls here has almost nowhere to go. That single fact, a plain too level to shed its own water, is the reason a bog exists at all. When water cannot drain, it pools and starves the soil of oxygen. In that cold, wet, airless ground, dead plants do not fully rot. Instead, they pile up, layer on layer, as a spongy brown material called peat. Sphagnum moss leads the process, growing on top while the moss beneath it dies and compresses, adding to the mat year after year. Peat forms astonishingly slowly, often less than an inch in a century, so the ground under this boardwalk represents thousands of years of accumulation. What we are crossing is the edge of the Red Lake Peatland, the largest continuous expanse of peatland in the northern contiguous United States. Much of it took shape over roughly the last 3,000 years, and it holds a whole gallery of features that scientists travel here to study. This is not one uniform swamp. It is a mosaic of raised bogs and open fens, of wetter and drier zones, each supporting a slightly different community of plants. Ecologists consider it one of the finest patterned peatlands anywhere on the continent. The boardwalk we are on is an engineering answer to an impossible problem: how to let people into ground that cannot bear them. Completed in 2005, it runs a full mile straight out into the open bog. Its walking surface is a great design to let up to 37% of natural sunlight pass through, so the plants beneath the walkway keep growing instead of dying in shadow. It rests lightly on the peat rather than crushing it, a rare structure built to disturb the wilderness as little as possible while still carrying you into its heart. Look closely at the low green carpet beside the rail, and you are looking at one of the hungriest plant communities in North America. The peat here is so poor in nutrients that some plants have given up on getting nitrogen from the soil and started catching it instead. They trap and digest insects. In a landscape that looks gentle and mossy, the ground is quietly full of predators, small ones, patient ones, waiting for a fly to make a mistake. The first of these hunters is the sundew, a plant barely wider than a coin. Each of its tiny leaves is studded with red tentacles tipped in a droplet that glitters like dew, which is where the name comes from. That glitter is glue. When an insect lands to drink, it sticks fast, and the leaf slowly curls around it to dissolve the meal. It is a beautiful, ruthless little thing, and it thrives here precisely because the bog gives it nothing else to live on. The other famous carnivore of the Big Bog is the pitcher plant. Its leaves form deep, water-filled tubes streaked with veins, and insects crawl in drawn by nectar and color. Downward-pointing hairs line the throat, so a visitor that enters finds it nearly impossible to climb back out. It slips into the pool at the bottom, and the plant absorbs what it needs. Whole miniature ecosystems live inside those pitchers, but for most insects, the pitcher is simply a trap they never leave. It is worth remembering how delicate all of this is. The mat of moss and roots beneath us can be centuries old, and a single footprint off the walkway can scar it for years. That is the deeper reason the boardwalk exists, not only to keep visitors from sinking, but to keep the bog from being loved to death. Everything we can see is holding a balance that took millennia to build. We are guests on a surface older than the state itself. For all its harshness, the bog is also a place of surprising flowers. Rare orchids grow here, delicate blooms that most people would never expect in a northern swamp. They emerge low among the moss and sedge, easy to miss unless you slow down and search for them. Some are so uncommon that botanists keep their locations quiet. In a landscape defined by scarcity, these orchids are small extravagances, proof that the bog can be as lovely as it is severe. Notice how small the trees are out here. Black spruce and tamarack ring the open bog, but they are stunted, spindly things, some of them a century old yet no taller than a person. The peat is simply too cold, too wet, and too starved of nutrients to let them grow the way they would on solid ground. A tree the width of your thumb might have been alive since before this boardwalk was ever imagined. Age here is measured not in height but in stubbornness. Tamarack is one of the few trees that can make a living on the bog margin, and it does so with a curious trick. Unlike most conifers, it is deciduous, turning gold and dropping all its needles every autumn before growing them back in spring. In the transition zone between open bog and forest, tamarack and black spruce form a ragged, stunted woodland found almost nowhere else in the state. This narrow band is its own habitat, neither true forest nor true bog, home to creatures that live on the edge of both. From the ground it is hard to see, but from the air the Red Lake Peatland reveals an astonishing order. The vegetation arranges itself into long parallel ridges and pools, aligned with the almost imperceptible flow of water across the plain. These patterns can stretch for miles, forming a landscape that looks deliberately drawn. They are one of the reasons this peatland is studied by scientists from around the world. Nature here behaves less like a random swamp and more like a slow, living design. Those ridges and hollows are shaped by water that moves so slowly you would never notice it walking. Water tracks thread through the peatland like ghost rivers, drier ribbons of ground alternating with wetter channels. Each band supports its own mix of mosses and sedges, so the whole surface becomes a map of how moisture travels. It took researchers decades to understand that the bog is not stagnant at all. It is flowing, imperceptibly, drop by drop, across a landscape that looks utterly still. This vast wet wilderness was once home to an animal that no longer lives anywhere in the lower 48 states. Woodland caribou ranged across these peatlands, and the Big Bog was among their last refuges. They moved through the open ground on wide hooves built for soft footing, browsing lichen and sheltering in the stunted spruce. To stand here is to look across a habitat that still remembers a creature it lost within living memory. The bog kept its shape, but the herd did not survive. The last woodland caribou disappeared from this region in the 1930s and 40s, pushed out by hunting, fire, and the draining of their habitat. Remarkably, the trails they wore into the peat as they migrated toward calving grounds in Canada can still be traced across the Red Lake Peatland today. The animals are gone, but their paths remain pressed into the ground. It is one of the quietest monuments in Minnesota, a set of footprints without a single foot left to walk them. The bog's human story is largely a story of failure, and it begins with an offer. In 1889, the federal government opened nearly 3 million acres of the Red Lake region to settlement, land drawn from the Red Lake Nation's reservation. On paper, it looked like opportunity, endless flat acreage waiting for the plow. In reality, much of it was bog, ground that no farmer could drain or work. The gap between the promise and the peat would ruin a generation of hopeful settlers. At first, the free land drew little interest, because anyone who visited could see the water standing on it. So the local government tried to fix the land itself. In 1908, Beltrami County borrowed money to dig an enormous network of drainage ditches, betting that if the bog could be drained, farmers would finally come. It was a massive public gamble, financed on the belief that engineering could turn a peatland into a wheat field. The ditches went in, mile after straight mile, and the county waited for the water to leave. Draining this region meant carving channels through raw peat with steam-powered dredges, a brutal, slow, expensive effort. Across northern Minnesota, this kind of systematic ditching peaked between about 1900 and 1920, laying down a grid of drainage lines still visible on maps today. The machines chewed south through the wetland, throwing up long banks of black spoil. It was one of the largest attempts to remake a landscape that the state had ever seen. And on ground this flat, the water simply refused to run downhill. The drainage plan did not work. The land was too level for the ditches to pull the water away, and the peat that did dry out was thin, acidic, and nearly worthless for crops. Worse, drained peat is flammable, and fires could smolder underground for weeks. The county had gone deep into debt to conquer the bog, and the bog had simply outlasted the effort. What the ditches produced was not farmland but ruin, both for the landscape and for the treasury that funded them. Still, people came and tried. Through the 1910s and 20s, homesteaders staked claims on the drained edges of the bog and set about proving up their land. They built cabins, cleared what they could, and planted into ground that flooded in spring and burned in drought. Some managed a few hard seasons. Almost none could make a living from it. One by one, the claims were abandoned, the cabins left to rot back into the wet ground they had never truly conquered. Among those who arrived were immigrant families, including Czech settlers who reached this region around 1914. They came with the same dream that had drawn everyone, a piece of land to call their own. What they found was a place that tested them past the breaking point, where farming the swampland could not feed a family no matter how hard they worked. Many moved on. Those who stayed survived by turning to the lake, the timber, and eventually the tourists, rather than the soil. The Great Drainage Project failed, but it did not vanish. Out in the peatland, the old ditches are still there, long dead straight lines cut into a landscape that has no other straight lines at all. From the air, they betray exactly where the county tried and failed to drain the bog more than a century ago. Nature has softened them, filled them, grown over them, yet the geometry persists. They are the scar tissue of an ambition the wilderness refused, written permanently into the ground. If farming could never sustain this corner of Minnesota, the water could. For generations, the little community of Waskish lived off Upper Red Lake, one of the great walleye fisheries of the state. Anglers came for the fish, resorts and bait shops grew up along the shore, and the town's whole economy floated on the lake's abundance. It was a hard, seasonal, but genuine way to live in a place the plow had rejected. And then in the 1990s, the fish disappeared. The walleye population of Upper Red Lake crashed in the 1990s, and in 1999 the sport fishery was closed entirely. For Waskish, it was a catastrophe. The single resource the town had leaned on for a century was suddenly gone, and with it went the anglers, the money, and the reason for many to stay. State hatcheries and careful management would eventually rebuild the walleye, but recovery took years. In the meantime, the community had to find another way to survive. The answer, remarkably, was the bog itself. The same wilderness that had defeated the ditch diggers and the homesteaders became the town's new hope. Rather than fight the peatland, the community decided to invite people to walk into it. Out of that idea came Big Bog State Recreation Area and this very boardwalk, a way to turn Minnesota's last true wilderness into something that could sustain the people beside it. The land that once took everything finally began to give something back. For all it has lost, the Big Bog remains gloriously wild. Moose wade the margins and browse the willow, and timber wolves range across the peatland hunting deer through the stunted spruce. Black bears den in the drier islands, and bald eagles ride the wind above the open ground. It is a full northern wilderness, largely untouched because it was never worth farming. The very qualities that broke the settlers, the wetness and the emptiness, are what preserved it for the wildlife that thrives here still. Winter here is long and severe, and it shapes everything. Average temperatures in the coldest months hover around 5 degrees, and the record low for this area reaches nearly 50 below zero. The bog freezes solid, the tamaracks stand bare and gold gone gray, and snow smooths the patterned ground into a single white plain. For months the wilderness belongs entirely to the cold. It is a reminder that this was never an easy land, and that its beauty has always come wrapped in hardship. As the boardwalk carries us back towards solid ground, it is worth holding on to what this place is. A 500-square-mile bog on the bed of a vanished glacial sea, a garden of carnivorous plants and hidden orchids, a graveyard of failed ditches and abandoned homesteads, a refuge for moose and wolves and the memory of caribou. Few short walks in America cross so much time, so much ambition, and so much quiet endurance in a single mile. The Big Bog defeated nearly everyone who tried to conquer it, and in refusing them it stayed wild long enough for us to simply come and look. That may be the truest gift a wilderness can give, to remain itself. If this walk across Minnesota's last true wilderness moved you, take a moment to look up the Red Lake Peatland and the town of Waskish that guards its edge. There is far more to this quiet country than a single mile can hold. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.